Hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Reasonable Doubt. I'm your host, Jimmy Ardoin. We are brought to you by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association, along with my co-host, Julio the Hair Vela. We're on Hair Watch, man.
Hey, man, look, you get a haircut, you look good. Okay, I'm growing mine out. Okay, it is what it is. I will say, hey, I almost wore my Go America shirt tonight because of the soccer that's going on.
Yeah.
So to everybody who's out there, I'm gonna say it now. LeBron James over Steph Curry tonight. United States goes for the win tonight.
I think the hair is affecting your judgment. I'm concerned. I really am. I mean, Justin told you to get a haircut. You didn't.
He did.
I mean, at this point, it's kind of a public health concern. We're in a heat wave. And you choose to grow your hair out.
It's very hot. It's very, very hot. It's very hot. As
this might affect your judgment.
As the artist says, too hot. Call the police and the fireman. Too hot. Make a dragon wanna retire, man. Who's the little short guy who sings that?
Oh. I didn't recognize it because of your singing skills right off the bat, but I think, isn't that Bruno Mars?
Bruno Mars. Yeah. Bruno Mars.
Took me a while to get that.
Anyways, hey, you know what? But you look great with your haircut, okay?
That's right.
But you know who looks even better?
Our guest this evening, Brian Roberts, first time on the program. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. And returning, Abigail Anastasio.
Hello, good evening.
How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Oh, we're doing great. We're doing great. We got a lot to get to tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We will open up the phone lines around 8:30. 713-807-1794 is the number. We also got Twitter up at HCCLA_TV. So send us your questions and comments. We'll take them live right here on the air. All right, guys, I want to get to the first topic for this evening, and there's been a lot of discussion about the judge in California, Judge Persky, in this Stanford sexual assault case. Of course, Brock Turner, the defendant in that case, received by what everyone in the media and a lot of people on social media think was an extremely lenient sentence when he only got 6 months in jail for the sexual assault of a fellow student at Stanford who was passed out behind a dumpster. Several witnesses. He took the case to trial, and it is a little bit shocking that after a trial he would get such a sentence, but none of us were there, and I think that's the big thing that I struggle with is everybody's entitled to their opinion, but nobody was, other than the people in the courtroom and the judge himself who sat through the entire trial, who analyzed all the punishment evidence, and he made the decision. And of course, now he's facing huge backlash for it, to the point where there's another case. What happened this week, there's another sexual assault case, which the prosecutors exercised their right under California law to file a peremptory challenge and have him removed from the case.
Okay, so basically the California prosecutors are saying, hey, judge, you cannot preside. We're filing this challenge on your ability to be fair in this case. On this new sexual assault case, you cannot preside. Can they do that unilaterally, or is there any hearing over it? And I ask, what's the difference here in Texas? Like, what's the rule here?
Apparently in California you can.
Just unilaterally style?
Yeah.
You just make an allegation and that's just it?
What I understand is, under the law in California, a party, meaning defense or prosecution in a criminal case or plaintiff or defendant, can file a peremptory challenge to a judge, and it's always granted. You get one peremptory challenge, basically, saying we don't want that judge to hear the case. And you file an affidavit in support of why, and basically can't even be challenged. So it's a different system than what we have here, but it is interesting because there's just been so much of a spotlight on this judge. Warranted or unwarranted, guys?
Well, that's a good question. I think what sparked this was not only his ruling in the sexual assault case, but there was another case, I believe, right after that, a theft case that he summarily dismissed without allowing any evidence to be heard, and that district attorney just decided that an upcoming sexual assault case that his office was bringing in his court wouldn't get the type of treatment or hearing that it deserved, and they exercised their right to have him removed from the case, which in Texas is obviously very different. You can't recuse a judge unless there's some showing of bias or some type of conflict of interest.
We get that a lot of times from clients saying, well, can I get in front of a different judge and can I do this? And the quick and dirty answer is, dude, no. Sorry, bro, you're not going to get a different judge. You happen to land in this court, and that's just how it is. I myself have never tried to remove a judge from a particular type of case, but I have two questions, and maybe, for the panel, as a legitimate legal questions. If I'm not mistaken, does the judge hear their own recusal motion, or does somebody else? And B, what's the standard for it? Do any of y'all know?
Clarify for me. Are you talking about here in Texas?
Here in Texas.
Oh.
Here in Texas.
And I've never filed a recusal of a judge, but the way I understand it goes to the administrative judge, who I believe is up in Conroe.
Correct.
And he's the one who decides. He hears the recusal and decides whether or not to assign a new judge. It's very difficult, as you pointed out, Brian, to get a recusal here in Texas of a judge. Now, and this is an interesting case because, as we're all familiar with on criminal cases, if a judge, just like if a jury, can't consider the full range of punishment, then they could be disqualified. If a judge says to you, well, this is the kind of case where I just cannot consider the full range of punishment, well, then that judge can't actually hear the punishment phase of the case and sit in judgment on it. So it's a basis for recusal. That rarely happens. I guess I've never seen it, but I've heard legend that it's happened. But that's really the only basis that I can think of, other than some sort of conflict of interest in the case, which I think happens a lot more on the civil side, where you have judges who hold stock in a company and they have to hear potentially a case that involves that company as a defendant or maybe a plaintiff. Or some sort of other actual legitimate conflict, a family conflict or something like that. But the interesting thing here is they are basically exercising a peremptory challenge, which is clearly their right. I think basically he can't be fair to us. He's not going to give us a fair punishment hearing, and he's not looking out for the victims, so to speak, in this case. Because that seems to be the theme of what happened in this case. They don't feel... Everybody who's come out, they say, well, they don't think he treated the victim fair in this case. And there's, that's an argument to be made. But that's kind of the way I see it. How do y'all see it?
One of the biggest problems that I have is he got sex registration. It's a big deal.
It is.
It's a real big deal. And I don't think the public, maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't think the media has portrayed or even informed the public that sexual registration is a big deal. He got 6 months in county jail, which, at least here in Texas, you could die in the county jail here in Texas. I'd imagine that he'll probably be raped and beaten in county jail.
Well, I don't think he will. I think they've got him in segregation.
Do they really? Okay, for his own
reason.
safety. Well,
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
And they say he's only going to serve about 90 days.
Well, but okay, maybe that is a slap on the wrist. But at the same token, this sex registration, do you know, can any of y'all talk about what would happen to somebody if they become a registered sex offender?
It's almost impossible to function in society. It limits where you can work, it limits where you can live. It limits the type of jobs you can have, the interactions you can have with other people. You have to be very careful, not only with your interactions, but to ensure that you are following the state's mandate about registering when you're supposed to on time, because at least in Texas, that's a separate offense. If you're a registered sex offender and you don't register when you're supposed to, well, that's another crime that you're committing. So it is a tremendous burden. And in Texas, if you take a look at the code under Section 62, there is supposed to be a commission that's set up to evaluate sex offenders and whether termination of registration would be appropriate, and that's never been funded and probably never will be funded. So while it exists in the code, it doesn't exist in reality.
So he'll do 90 days in jail, let's say, and then register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. if anybody's seen any sort of documentary on what life is like as a sex offender, these people literally live in the woods. They can't live next to anybody. They can't rent an apartment. They can't live next to a school. They can't live next to anything. They literally live in the woods or in an underpass, and just kind of live by the day on whatever they can get by. Obviously, I think he probably has a little bit of financial means that he'll be able to do a little bit better, but
Yeah, I don't think he'll be living in the
he's
woods.
done.
Yeah, I don't,
He's over. The guy's
I don't think
over.
he'll be living in a van down by the river.
Yeah, no.
Going to finance.
Well, and the worst part, I think, the part that made this case really bad was the dad's letter. The dad's letter, come on. I mean, like, what, if you're the defense attorney in this case, why would you let him submit that? I mean, if I'm the defense attorney and that's the letter the dad writes, I'm instructing him, go back and write another letter and take that crap out. 20 minutes of action? No, take that out. I mean, I'm amazed that if that's the letter that went to the judge, that they did still get that sentence. But it's just like, what goes through your mind to write that on behalf of your son, one? And two, the defense lawyer, like, if that's the letter I get, I'd tear it up and put it in the trash.
Yep.
And say, if you can't write anything better, you're not writing a letter at all. That was crazy.
Well, I think that explains the kid's thought process. Number one, it
Exactly.
trickles down. It trickles down from dad.
Right.
But the other thing is we don't know how it got to the judge, because any lawyer worth his salt is going to say there is no way that I'm presenting that to this judge in this case. Maybe he went around the lawyer. We don't know if the lawyer knew about the letter ahead of time or not.
Yeah, we don't. And I mean, to be fair, I read Brock Turner got a lot of pushback for his statement that he gave, but I actually thought his statement wasn't that bad. I mean, I thought it spoke of the truth, and frankly, I mean, he lives in a different world. I mean, he had the opportunity to be an Olympic swimmer. He outlined essentially all the collateral consequences that this was going to have on his life. So, I understand the activists, and look, I've got a daughter as well. God forbid anything like this ever happened to her. I'd be mad, and I probably would not think that this was enough justice for her if something like this happened. But looking at it from a defense standpoint, I don't have a problem with the sentence, because I think everything was evaluated. I mean, there was a trial.
Right.
The judge had a fair chance to hear all the evidence in the case. And that's a big deal, because they wanted to make an issue about, well, he didn't plead, so he didn't accept responsibility early on. But I think it's even more remarkable, in my opinion, that he got the sentence he got after a full trial on the merits. I really think that's amazing.
I wonder what it does to the system itself when, obviously, we weren't there.
Right.
A judge heard all the evidence and came to a decision on punishment. And I'm wondering if this will cause other judges to restrain themselves in initially thinking, okay, I should maybe give punishment X, Y, Z, but because of political pressure or because I'm not going to be reelected, in a same or similar circumstance, I'm going to go ahead and satisfy what the public wants. And it's scary, man. That fear is very scary.
Well, look what happened to that Nevada judge. He lost in a landslide election because he did something very unpopular with that public defender by putting her in handcuffs and putting her in the jury box. Got a lot of bad press, and he loses by a 65, 25 margin. I mean, it wasn't even close. He gets smoked. So, I mean, these kinds of sentences and the backlash and the publicity from can have a dramatic effect on elected judges. They really can.
Well, I think you have, there's two sides to that argument too. You have the appointed judges who, as you know, in federal district court,
Yeah.
Barring some type of illegality on their part, I mean, they're there until they die. And some of those judges are their decisions are awful.
Yeah.
And you're stuck with that judge
Right.
until that judge is either impeached for doing something they shouldn't have done, or they retire, or they die at the bench. But the flip side is when you have elected judges like we do in Texas and like this judge is in California, is now you have a judge who is taking political considerations in his analysis of what a criminal defendant should get, and that's absolutely not fair. A criminal defendant should be sentenced appropriate to the offense and the evidence and the facts surrounding that offense, not any type of outside political pressure of, I wonder what the electorate is going to say, I wonder what, the party chiefs are going to say if I go with punishment X instead of punishment Y.
Yeah.
There was an interesting story on NPR maybe about 2 months ago regarding whether or not white judges punish white defendants harder or not as hard as white judges punish black defendants, and vice versa, whether black defendants judges are harder on black defendants or if they're harder on white defendants. And what it came down to was it really didn't matter whether the race of the judge or the defendant, and it turned out that actually black judges are harder on black defendants than they are on white defendants, and they had a good analysis as to why that may happen. But we can't view this case just in a vacuum because of the political correctness involved in it. We've seen black defendants get sentenced to much harsher sentences. And, I'm not one to say like, oh, there's racism involved or anything like that, because I don't believe it, at least in this scenario. However, I wonder if it was just good lawyering. Like,
Right.
It was just good lawyering, and they presented their evidence in a way that was compelling, and they got the job done.
Well, and I think there's a great argument to be made for that. I have a question for both of y'all. You both were prosecutors.
Correct.
And now you're defense lawyers. I wonder, because I've only been a defense lawyer, and I only know the difficulties in representing somebody on the defense side and the angst that goes into that. And I wonder, as a prosecutor, especially in these types of cases, what is harder for you guys, representing a client or representing, as the state, a victim in a case like this?
Well, as far as you have a lot of pressures from the family and outside opinions, so you want to get justice for that victim. I'm not really sure exactly what you said, a client?
Yeah, so I mean from an emotional
saying
standpoint, the difference between, as a defense attorney, you obviously live all of your clients' emotions, and you feel their pain, and you live the day-to-day. But I can foresee how, when you're the prosecutor and you talk to victims like this, and especially in these kind of cases, I mean, you take on the load, you shoulder the load, and I wonder, having been on both sides, which do you find is harder? Is it representing someone who's accused or representing the victim in a case like this?
I definitely had some very emotional moments as a prosecutor, when I didn't think the outcome was necessarily correct or I could do, what they wanted me to do. But I would say that as a defense attorney, the stress is much different because you're responsible ultimately. As a prosecutor, at the end of the day, you get to go home. You may have somebody to answer to in an office the next day, but as a defense attorney, the only thing you have is to go home and reflect upon it yourself, and ultimately you're responsible to yourself and your client. And I find that to be very different, and it's hard. It's very hard.
Brian,
What
how
says
about
you,
you?
Brian?
I think it's much harder as a defense lawyer. On the prosecution side, you have to really evaluate the case, and not every, you have the sexual assault case. Well, not every sexual assault case is the same. A sexual assault case of a 3-year-old child is going to be different than a sexual assault case of a 16-year-old, where it's perhaps not.
Might be consensual.
It might be consensual, but because of their age, they're not, as far as the law is concerned, they're not able
Right.
to consent. So it runs the gamut, but it's certainly much more difficult because right out of the gate, anytime you have a jury, just the stigma of a sexual offense, and especially involving children, when you're talking about those types of cases, just the stigma of sexual assault, I think, is very difficult, and you're climbing a hill from the start on that, and it's very, very difficult, especially when you have a client saying, I swear I didn't do this, and there's really no physical evidence. There's nothing but one person saying, this defendant did this to me, and the defendant saying, I swear to God it didn't. And the big question is then why would she lie, or why would he lie?
Yeah, I can see that. I haven't done a whole lot of sexual assault cases. I mean, I've done a few, but I've always wondered that from the prosecution side, just having the victims, call you every day, or the complainants call you every day to check in on a case status, and then, when they don't feel the justice has been done in a case. So I've often wondered about that.
I've always felt that, people always want to ask, well, how can you, and even with the lawyers on the Stanford case, the individual from Stanford, they talk like, how do you represent this individual, and how do you do those things? I always feel like when we get an acquittal, when we secure an acquittal for a client, or we get a not guilty, it's a defense win, but at the same token, they didn't meet a burden that was provided to the people, by the people, in order to convict someone. And I don't classify it as some sort of failure of justice, but at the same token, there was not enough evidence presented to label someone a criminal, because you can't erase that. I mean, you can't, what's the one thing worse than being convicted of a crime? Well, the one thing worse than being convicted of a crime is being convicted of a crime you didn't commit. And that stigma alone in our society is horrible, especially when you're talking about sex cases. And so I've never been a prosecutor myself, but I'd imagine on the same token, on the flip side, it's a very difficult job to do.
Well, and sex offenses, I think, are so tough because, I mean, look what's going on at Baylor, guys. I mean, the fallout can be so massive on these kind of scandals. We saw it at Penn State. Now we're seeing it at Baylor. It's like apparently nobody learned their lesson about covering up a sex scandal. The cover-up is always worse than the crime. And the sexual assault report that was just issued for Baylor, I mean, it's pretty damning, very damning. I mean, it's almost as if there was a pervasive culture of this. It's very troubling, obviously, on a lot of different levels. But guys, is the criminal justice system, how is it failing in Waco? Because and we'll get to your situation a little later, Abigail, but what's going on up there. But with regard to Baylor, it seems like there was a concerted effort amongst the police, the DA's office, and the Baylor administration to just kind of make this stuff go away. And I understand they got Awachaku, they convicted him. They had a couple other, but they almost seem to look the other way on a few of these things. And I wonder, is that system just completely broken up there?
Well, I mean,
setting aside the biker case.
Right. What else do they have besides Baylor University?
Whataburger?
The Whataburger? I mean, if
Dairy Queen.
All they have is Baylor, then they're going to have to try to keep that as pristine as possible. So we can do a little bit of justice here and there, but let's sweep the rest of this under the rug. I looked at that report. I don't remember the name of the law firm.
Pepper Hamilton, out of Philadelphia.
Well, I wish I could have been paid to write that thing. It's pretty.
That's a good gig in the law business, to write investigative reports. So you get paid a lot of money to and that was only like 13 pages too. I mean, it wasn't even what Ken Starr did back in his day.
Essentially just says we need to change the culture of the university. Well, thank you. Appreciate 12 pages of change the culture. But I find it just repulsive how they tried to discourage people from reporting these crimes. They inserted themselves and actually, intervened and talked to these people. I think there was some evidence of retaliation on victims that actually tried to go forward on their cases. And I just wonder where else this is happening.
So apparently at Baylor, women are being sexually assaulted and they're coming forward, and there's some sort of systematic approach to either repress those allegations or accept them, but then funnel them in some sort of
Black hole.
Yeah, right, black hole, so to say. Is that right? I mean, did y'all read the article the same way I did?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's just, I think you have that, I don't think it's just limited to Baylor. I think any school with a major program like that, you have to realize how much money a football program brings in. Mm-hmm. And what is at stake when you have allegations like that, especially if they're found to be true, and even worse if it's found that you have administration that's actively involved in trying to suppress these things. But you're talking about sanctions from the collegiate governing bodies. You're talking about sanctions that will cost them probably TV time, which is where they make a ton of money. It'll cost them in getting recruits. So I think this comes down to, it's a financial decision. It's protecting your moneymaker. And I'm certainly not defending it. They handled it very poorly. I think there has to be a system for it. It has to be investigated. It should be investigated. I don't think it needs to be a knee-jerk reaction of as soon as there's some type of allegation that you come up with a final decision that a player's kicked off the team or loses a scholarship or whatever. There has to be some type of due process there, because being defense attorneys, we know that there are folks who make false allegations.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that all these claims are false allegations, but each claim should be looked at individually, and there should be a process to handle it.
And that's the difficulty, I feel like, in sexual assault cases is more than any other case. I feel like it is ripe for false allegations. And I think it is the most difficult case to defend. Because oftentimes you are caught in a situation where, like you alluded to, Brian, you don't have physical evidence. So what are you left with? You're left with a he said, she said, and maybe no physical evidence and no other witnesses. And you're walking in as a defense lawyer with that presumption that this ain't good. This ain't good for you to have this allegation. And so it's really to see a culture like this that is helping to protect it when it's troubling on so many levels. And a lot of people are going to question, and I want to get y'all's opinion on this, and because a lot of people out there are going to say, how can they not charge the administration with a crime? How is there not a crime for these guys or the DA's office or the police for doing what they did, for looking the other way, for not investigating, for silencing these witnesses? How is there not a crime for that?
And should there be?
Well, I think you can charge a corporation with a crime. You certainly can under federal law,
right?
And their officers are brought to bear, and I think there probably is. I think you have potential issues of obstruction. Now, a lot of these don't have sharp teeth, but nevertheless, I think there are crimes that folks can be charged with, and again, that would require an investigation. And if the local law enforcement agencies aren't that excited about it, then you need to bring in Texas Rangers, get an independent law enforcement agency to take a look at it and investigate it. And if somebody has engaged in criminal conduct, obstructing an investigation, or tampering with a witness, then that's certainly something that should be pursued. But it shouldn't be something that's a knee-jerk reaction. Again, every case needs to be investigated, and all the facts need to be developed independently.
Sure. Yeah,
I guess up until now they've just dealt with it with civil liability, but I definitely think there needs to be some sort of criminal action for these people.
I mean, they've got a huge Title IX case going on. Obviously, apparently today, Art Briles isn't going to go down easily. He's going to go down swinging on a wrongful termination case. So this may not be the end, so to speak.
Well, he's going to be sitting over there with old, who's the old tech, Leach?
Oh, yeah. Well, he's up at Washington State.
Yeah, he's going to be up there. I mean, look, I don't know how much did Bryles have to do with this? Do we know? Did he know about it? I mean, was it that far in? Because if not, Texas needs a new coach, man.
I think it comes down to whoever's the boss.
Yeah.
The boss. You're always going to be held responsible for what the people underneath you or in your command do, and I think that's why it's coming back to Bryles, what he knew or didn't know. But
And Ken Starr.
and talk about karma coming back.
Exactly. I mean, the irony of all ironies, Ken Starr. And I heard today from somebody that they, I guess he got stripped of the president title, but he's still a law professor.
Well, and I think he's still
but
chancellor, right? I mean, he's still up there. He just stepped down from
that's
president,
I
but
talked
still
to
holds the
somebody-
higher title. Or
I talked to somebody today up there who went to Baylor Law School, and they just think he's hiding out on the third floor of the law school or whatever.
One of my thoughts are, though, is, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I'm a defense lawyer, and going back on these false allegations. But should we really be condemning? How much does the context and situation have to play? Look, you shouldn't be raping somebody behind a dumpster, okay? You shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
However, what happens when, no means no, but what happens when you're both drunk and something happens, okay? And how oftentimes, or do we even ever hear about a male being a victim versus maybe not sexual assault, but also in assault cases. I know plenty of times when the husband is just like, man, she was beating me up, I had to punch her back, or these kind of. But unfortunately, it's always the man that gets charged, and so I don't know where. And I'm not preaching for that, but I'm playing the devil's advocate. And if anybody's watched, look, there's a number on there. Call. Are there times where, hey, man, that guy just got a bad rap, or this is a bad scenario, and I wonder if there's any safeguards for those individuals.
I revert back to your statement earlier, dude. No.
Dude,
I'm gonna get you a T-shirt of that.
dude,
That's gonna be your new T-shirt. It is 8:30, ladies and gentlemen. We're gonna open up the phone lines, take your questions and comments live right here on the air. 713-807-1794 is the number. We've also got Twitter up at HCCLA_TV. I also need to mention our guests tonight, Brian and Abigail, two of our bloggers, very good bloggers for HCCLA TV. You can read their blog entries over at our website, www.hcclatv.com. They've got, in fact, Brian, you have a new post up this week, don't you?
Yeah, it just came out a couple days ago.
Yeah, very good stuff.
Very
all
good.
about, and I'm just gonna give a tease because we're not gonna talk about it. I want people to go read it. We need to get some clicks, right?
There you go.
So it would be pointless to talk about it. But it's all about when the media gets into the jail. If you've seen a lot of interviews with inmates and you wonder, like, how the heck the media get in there and where's their lawyer to stop this thing? Well, Brian wrote an article about it this week and he'll explain it to you. So good stuff. I appreciate both of y'all contributing to the blog because it really helps our TV show and helps our audience. And you guys got some great, insightful information. So we appreciate it.
There have been some great articles posted lately.
There really have some really good stuff. So I encourage everybody to go check it out. And we got a phone call coming in right now. Let's head over to the lines. Take a call. Hello, welcome to Reasonable Doubt.
Hello. I wanted to make a comment and ask a question with regard to, or really just comment, with regard to that California case and the judge's action.
Yeah.
First of all, and I'm just saying from the viewer's perspective, it sounded like there was, a case being made that rape, or I should say the 6 months plus the sex offender designation is pretty good for rape, that ought to be about okay, because it was sounding like there was this big emphasis on the designation as being, a stigma for the rest of his life, and I guess that's what it's supposed to be, though, isn't it? So,
repeat that last sentence.
Well, there was so much emphasis put on the fact that the sex offender designation that the defendant or that the criminal would carry with him for the rest of his life was such a big deal. And I'm sure it is, but I suspect it's supposed to be, isn't it?
It is, and look, I understand the point. I think we all understand the point that a lot of people have that the sentence it wasn't harsh enough or it wasn't strong enough to send a message. I think my point was, and y'all feel free to chime in, but My point is, I don't find it to be inherently unreasonable on its face because we weren't there, you know? So it's hard for me to sit here and say it was an unreasonable sentence. For those that were in the courtroom, I know there was a juror who thought it was an unreasonable sentence. That clearly that juror heard all the evidence in the case, but so did the judge. And, you know, the jury wasn't asked to do punishment in this case. And so for me, I just find it very difficult sitting 1,800 miles, 2,000 miles away from Palo Alto, where this case took place, to sit here and say that on its face it's an unreasonable sentence. That's my only point.
Let me ask you, caller, do you think that the judge should be recused or?
He's off.
Oh, okay, he's off. Well, I mean, I don't know whether the judge should be recused or not, or preemptoried out. I don't know. You know, he heard all the evidence, and it's tough to make a decision as an outsider.
I can't fault him for that.
I agree. As far as the sex offender registration, that is a life sentence.
Right.
So again, we weren't in the courtroom, so I can't judge, you know, the intonation of the witness. I don't know what their credibility was.
Intonation. That's a good word. Can I write that down? How do you spell that?
You know, I think one of the things that people forget or they just don't look at is there's a range of punishment.
Right.
There's a minimum and there's a maximum.
Exactly.
And there's a reason for that, because if every sex case was the same or every murder case was the same, then the punishment would be exactly the same. But it's not. Every case is not the same. That's why, for example, in Texas, you know, murder is a first-degree felony, just like an aggravated robbery, and you can receive punishment from anywhere from 5 years to 99 years or life. Why would you have that wide of a sentence range? Well, because, you know, each case is different. Each case needs to be considered differently, and some cases are worth less and some cases are worth more. And I think in the California case, you had a judge who listened to all the evidence and based on the range of punishment felt that was appropriate.
Yeah.
Well, and judges, you know, they're in the criminal justice system. They understand that prison time, jail time, depending, can actually create more of a burden on society when the person gets out, and maybe more harmful to others. So I'm sure he took that into consideration as well.
Yeah. We'll get another call. Let's drop it in here. Hello. Welcome to Reasonable Doubt. Thanks for your call.
Hi. I actually have a question regarding the judge in the case, Judge Persky.
Sure.
And I understand the prosecutors are pretty upset about his leniency in the judgment. But what happens when judges are biased? And whether you're defense or prosecution, how do we have faith in those judges in the future to know that they're going to make the right decision in the long run?
Great question. I mean, I think determining whether a judge has a bias in the case is one of the hardest things to do. I mean, you can ask them, but are they going to tell you?
No.
No, but I think if you practice long enough
Yep.
in front of these judges, I mean, we have 38 courts now, 16 misdemeanor, 22 felony courts, and we're in those courts practicing every day. And as defense lawyers, you know where the judge is going to say, well, sure, I will consider the full range of punishment. And you know absolutely that is not a judge that you want to take
Right.
your client to on punishment. You just know, even though the bias isn't explicitly stated.
Yeah, and you do know, for instance, that certain judges are not going to approve a probation on cases, or that they're not likely to do, you know, a deferred adjudication or something like that. I mean, you're right, Brian. I mean, it comes down to just being familiar with the judge. How you get around that, you really can't, unless you just set the case for trial. Right?
There's nothing you can really do. The electorate needs to be informed on judges and do what they need to do during the election cycle.
What about term
That's pretty
limits?
much
We've
it.
talked about that a little bit, but what's you guys' take on whether or not judges should be term limited?
You know, I think what happens when you, especially with the judiciary, in criminal cases, at criminal courts, there's so much at stake. I mean, we're not fighting over money. We're not fighting over property. We're fighting over life and in some cases death. And I think what happens is if you limit judges to 1 term or 2 terms, then you really start losing your depth of experience. And there are certain cases that need judges who are very experienced, such as your capital murder cases, your death capitals. Those cases really need judges who have experience, and if you limit them, I think that's that does more harm than good.
It's an interesting thought. We've
That's
talked about
an
it.
excellent point.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked about, judges are elected, should they be appointed? And I just don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
I don't think there's a good fix. We've had several people. I mean, Chris Tritico has offered his plan, the Tritico plan, to us. And look, I mean, everybody has a theory on how it can be done better, but I'm not sure. The system's not necessarily broken, so to speak, but yeah, I mean, there probably are ways to improve it. Who knows? All right, this Planned Parenthood thing keeps coming back, and it's in the news again because they dismissed one of the charges this week. Judge Diane Bull, Court 11. David DeLayden, I think is how you say his name. He had his charge dismissed this week, at least the misdemeanor portion. The felony is still pending. Why does anybody care about this, guys?
As if it was a... Look, I hear Yates is a big deal. But I hear, from what I understand, it's not that big of a deal. In other words, it was a technicality. Judge Bull, I love Judge Bull's a great judge. She said, look, get this mess out of my court, I think is what it kind of came down to.
Yeah, I mean, so this dismissal comes out, and Brian Rogers is blowing up Twitter. Everybody, KHOU, news alert, Planned Parenthood case dismissed. And it's, I don't get it. So what? The misdemeanor case is dismissed. I mean, the felony is still pending. You and I were talking about it before the show, Brian. I mean, the language was screwed up.
Yeah, that's basically what it comes down to. I think they, if I remember correctly, that they took this case to the grand jury, and the grand jury indicted it as a misdemeanor. And in Texas, misdemeanors don't. It's not required for a misdemeanor to get indicted. It's filed by what's called an information, which is basically a prosecutor taking the charge and signing the document. And that's exactly what happened in this case. Is the language didn't negate or include the language required in the statute. I think there's three elements that it discusses and says that he offered to pay a fee for embryonic tissue, but they didn't say that it was in the course of medical treatment or any one of those three provisions where they would have had to have said that he offered to pay, but it wasn't for any of these three reasons. And had they stated that, it would have been fine. And ultimately, if they really want to pursue this, they don't even have to re-indict it. They just refile it with the proper language, and it's back in misdemeanor court.
So district attorney goof or planned goof up? Huh?
I don't
I like that.
I don't know. I mean, this case seems silly to me.
Yeah.
It just seems silly.
Hey, like, you pay me $50,000 to find a defective information, I can do that, okay? Not a big deal. I hear Yates I'm sure he is very well.
You don't have to pay me anything to find
Yeah, I know. You can pay me $5.
Well, I was
I'll
going to
find
say,
it
you
in
don't,
about 10
you
minutes.
don't have to pay me anything to find a defective haircut
Well,
sitting across the
hey,
table.
look. The question is why it took so long. That's
To get the
question.
dismissal?
Yes, you should have brought this up in one or two settings. Or not, maybe not. Look, maybe not.
I mean, there's always a strategy for everything. I talk about this case because it keeps coming back up in the news, and you've got all these crazy websites that are up that are clearly not newsworthy, but they keep talking about this thing. I don't know. Let's get to the phones. This case bothers me. Hello, welcome to Reasonable Doubt. Thanks for your call.
Hi, I'm just calling it back again. I was listening to what you were saying about the judge, and I have a second question.
Sure.
I mean, what qualifies a judge to judge a capital murder case or any case for that matter?
Getting elected.
I think it's 5 years resident. I think 5
no,
years
I mean-
practicing in residence. I think that's about it, I think.
Yeah, I think, I don't even know what the actual qualifications are. I mean, obviously to be a district court judge, you have to be a licensed lawyer,
Right.
unlike JP court, where you don't have to be. But It is kind of, you talk about experience, Brian, and I think to the caller's point is it's like, well, what kind of experience are they getting? Because these are cases are randomly assigned. So, I mean, you get a brand new judge, get a capital murder case right out of the gate, they have no experience.
No, that's true, and my understanding is that the newly elected judges, even judges who are coming from the DA's office, had many years there, and they've prosecuted capital murder cases. You go to judge school.
Yeah.
Up in Austin, and that's just something that I think if you're coming from some other type of practice, a civil practice or otherwise, you're not going to have the experience necessary to sit on a capital case.
Right.
But I think because there's so much riding on these cases, you do need a deep bench. You do need an experienced bench.
Let's get another phone call in here. Hello, welcome to Reasonable Doubt.
Hey, guys. I was, with regard to the judges, y'all were talking earlier about whether they should be term limited or appointed or elected. And I'm curious, y'all were talking about potential solutions, and I'm curious what y'all think about if they were still elected, but they were no longer elected according to partisan lines.
Yeah, that's
taking off the partisan tickets.
Sure. I mean, California does it that way. They have a nonpartisan vote. Of course, City of Houston, we elect the mayor and city council based on nonpartisan elections. I asked this a few weeks ago. What is the point of having judges be part of the party lines, so to speak?
Money.
Yeah.
Well, so, I mean, I think going forward on what you had kind of alluded to, correct me if I'm wrong, but that the Trump supporters and Republicans are going to be coming out and become voting. And make no mistake about it, that's going to affect the type of decisions and type of decisions you're going to have in a lot of cases. I mean, we'd like to think that it doesn't affect, a judge's
Absolutely.
decision, but it might.
Well, I will say, in my opinion, I really don't think that a judge's administration of justice, the balls and strikes that he calls at the bench, should have anything to do with their political leanings. And I think we as citizens should be informed about how the judges operate on the bench, and we should be voting on that, not based on whether they are on a Democrat or a Republican Party ticket.
Yeah,
Couldn't agree with you more. The problem I see with that is it is almost impossible for the judges, I think both from a monetary standpoint and a time standpoint, to really educate the electorate of what they stand for and what they're really about. Because think about it, their job is to be a judge. If they're having to be out there educating the electorate, well, then they're not doing their job as a judge. And there's a financial component to this. They have limited resources. They really do. I mean, you can talk about fundraising all you want, but the judiciary, it's not like running for president. You don't have the entire party behind you. So I would like to see it be nonpartisan, but I just don't know how, without the parties involved, judges would be able to finance
Exactly.
the run.
If you take a look at the numbers in the polls, how many people are actually voting for judges?
Yeah.
I mean, the numbers are minuscule. So I think you have to have these parties. So you have this group, this electoral body that's actually going to vote for you and come out to vote for you, because other folks aren't informed. So that's why you go to all these, the lunches and the networking and the speeches and all that with your respective party.
Yeah, and it goes back to what people really care about, because the people who want to hear what a judge has to say, well, they're going to go to that luncheon. But the people who either aren't part of that social club or don't have access to that club, they're never going to hear what that judge has to say. Right. It's just the reality of it. It's a tough system. I wish there was an easy way to fix it, but there's not an easy solution. All right, let's move to your personal favorite topic, Abigail.
Okay.
And that is, you filed a motion to disqualify the McLennan County, Waco, district attorney in the biker case.
That is correct.
Why?
Yeah, tell us why.
Why?
Because they are, well, at least Abel Reyna, and then it would trickle down to those who work for him. They are people that I would want to cross-examine at trial.
Why?
And they are necessary witnesses.
But I'm having trouble understanding why.
Okay.
You're like a Miller Lite commercial right now.
But
Why?
Why? Why?
Well, as you know, everything about this case is unusual. There's never been anything like it. And yes, district attorneys have, it's common for them to go to the scene to advise on legal matters. If you read this offense report, you would be shocked to see how many times Abel Reyna's name is mentioned. Typically, just from your experience, how many times do you see the DA's name mentioned in an offense report?
Well, it shouldn't be. And
Only to accept the charge.
yeah.
Right.
And from what I understand, the basis of your motion is that Abel Reyna and his, I guess, first assistant and some of the other higher up in the office were actually leading the investigation.
Correct.
They were making the calls of who gets arrested, what charges to file. And correct me if I'm wrong on the facts, but before they arrived on the scene, the police had already processed and released several bikers.
Right.
And the DA's office comes in and says, whoa, 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 slow down the release train. Everybody needs to be arrested, and they need to be arrested for engaging in organized criminal activity.
The police were doing a capital murder investigation. There was nothing as far as engaging in organized crime even on the table or even a consideration at that time. Then, boom, Abel Reyna arrives on the scene, stops everybody, no more interviews, we're gonna have a meeting. And that's that time, that meeting. I need to know what went on in that meeting. So I need to be able to have a hearing to question these people. And I can see 1,000,001 ways that I would need to cross-examine these people at trial. And so that's the basis for my motion. I did amend it to add a secondary reason, as in he has a pecuniary interest in the outcome of this case.
How so?
Well, he's being sued in an individual capacity as in several civil suits, and based upon case law, he does not enjoy immunity for the basis of a lot of these charges. So, I mean, there's just a complete air of impropriety over the whole thing. Now, while that doesn't necessarily mean that just because there's an air of impropriety that you can't be the prosecutor in a case, just taking everything on the whole, I don't see how Abel Reyna can, in good conscience, be the prosecutor in this case.
Because he's a fact witness?
He's a fact witness. He also has a lot riding on this case, fiscally and emotionally. And I don't understand why, if there's such an air of impropriety, what attachments does he have in this case? Why would it be so difficult for him to just let a special prosecutor come and take it over? As we can see, just based upon the fact that they're fighting this tooth and nail, there is something else. He has some sort of attachment to this case, and the outcome of it affects him personally.
Well, the good news is you can talk about it today because the gag order's been lifted on the case.
What gag order? I don't know what you're talking about. Gag order.
Let me turn it over to my devil advocates on the other side. What kind of uphill battle does she face in this motion?
I think it comes down to, she's right, when the prosecutor crosses the line from being a lawyer to being an investigator and being active like the other officers on the scene, goes to the scene, directs the investigation, he's then a witness. I don't see any way of getting around that, especially talking about how involved he was in this. And of course, there's immunity issues in that as well, because he loses that immunity. I believe it goes down to limited immunity, just like any police officer would have. So the immunity that he enjoys as a prosecutor is diminished if he's looked at as being an active investigator in the case. Mm-hmm. So I think that that might play into it. I think overall, this is probably the biggest case of his career. I mean, this is the biggest thing that's happened in Waco since
Branch Davidian.
Branch Davidians.
Well, but you have all the Baylor way, Baylor
yeah,
stuff. So
but-
he's got that
but
going on,
this
but he's
is-
clearly helping out
But this is
the cover
definitely-
up, and only.
This is definitely the biggest thing going right now
Yeah.
in Waco, and he does not want to lose that to another prosecutor.
Well, and I don't know if any defendant would ever want to hire this guy anyway. So let's say he gets booted out of the DA's office. What defendant's going to go hire this guy who just indicted 100 of his friends? I mean,
He's going to become a judge.
that's funny. That
Yeah.
very well might happen.
Great solution to that problem.
So, do you actually have an evidentiary hearing set? Because
I
know
do.
Okay.
It was this past Monday, the 13th. However, witness availability issues. Seems like everyone's on vacation right now. So it got moved back to August 8th.
And do you think it'll actually go in August?
I do. I do think it'll go.
Have any of the other defendants joined your motion, and will they be participating in the hearing?
No, not as of now. I get a lot of phone calls from other people's lawyers, and everybody's really interested in it. Even the civil lawyers are very interested in the outcome. So it's not common, but I think in this case, I mean, it's an extraordinary circumstances. So, you know, there are going to be unconventional things that have to happen in a case like this.
I mean, I don't know how you shouldn't be able to cross-examine him regarding not only his motive and bias in his other issues, but the facts that he has regarding the way the operation was carried out. I mean, I guess the longer he stays in charge of this case, the more he's shielded and doesn't have to talk about or at least be cross-examined on those things. I'm very interested to see how it pans out.
Me too.
Should be a good one. I hope you'll come back on and enlighten us or write a blog post or something after it's all done.
I will.
Because you probably can't do too much while you're...
I'll write it in 10 years when it's done.
The Abigail Chronicles?
Yes.
Is that what you'll do?
Maybe I'll start a little blog and then publish it later.
Abigail
When the
versus
movie
DA.
comes out.
I love it. I love it.
It's like David versus Goliath.
It is. It is. Little old me.
How many... Well, we don't have enough time to get into it. We only got about 30 seconds left on the show. It's gone by quick, guys. I mean, this has been a good time. So what's the next article you guys got coming up? Anybody writing an article? You got yours this week. Are you up for one?
I was actually going to write something about, you know, the role of a prosecutor and crossing that line. And I mean, it's nowadays we're really looking at prosecutors and prosecutorial misconduct, and I think we need to really explore that further and let prosecutors know your job is to seek justice. That is your job. If you are going beyond that, I mean, it's not to convict people.
Brian, when can we expect your next blog post?
You know, I don't know, but there's so much that comes out every day that I could write about, but
We're waiting for it.
I'll let you know as soon as I do.
All right, appreciate it. That's all the time we have for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. For Brian Roberts, Abigail Anastasio, and my co-host, the Hair, Julio Vela. Good night, everybody. We'll see you next week.